Foxbat, or the Flying Fox. That was how Americans called the Soviet high supersonic fighter interceptor MiG-25P. September 6, 1976. On a far eastern airfield, Chugufta, routine flights were taking place. The usual rhythm of the day was interrupted by the news that MiG-25, piloted by the senior lieutenant Belenko, had disappeared from the radar screens. The plane started to send continuous disaster signals, which soon had stopped. It meant that the plane had crashed. Chiefs of the 586 Air Defense Regiment immediately ordered to start the search. The pilot had supposedly catapulted and the plane crashed. There was another version. The plane could have wandered off course and landed on foreign territory. This was feared above all. Our military intelligence had repeatedly warned that Foreign Secret Service in the USSR had started a total hunt for any information about the Foxbat. We prided ourselves in having the MiG-25, so feared in the West. In 1976, no country in the world had a fighter plane comparable with our MiG-25. U.S. Defense Minister James Schlesinger stated, "The Soviet fighter is such a menacing weapon that its serial production would entail drastic changes in Western armament and strategies." The same year, CIA managed to obtain fragmented information about the plane's navigational system. They knew the Soviet Union already had 400 such machines. That the plane would get into the hands of American military experts was inadmissible.
We were hoping the pilot would catapult. By the evening, the helicopter brought Chief of Radio Radar Troops, General Major Ivan Dobrovolsky, Member of the Military Board, General Major of Aviation, Lieutenant, and Head of the Political Department of that unit, Colonel Yuzhakov. Dobrovolsky said, "Forget the search commander. We need to talk in private." I said, "Of course."
Sibizov and Dobrovolsky spread the map of the radar station's taggings. "Here's the tagging," the general said. "He is abroad in Japan." Sibizov said that maybe the plane had wandered off course, but soon what was guesswork became a fact. At 1352, 300 meters above the civil airport, Hakatati, a most exotic twin-fin plane appeared, which did not resemble an airliner, even after a liter of sake. The plane was intending to land, but the strip was occupied by the Boeing taking off. To avoid collision, the pilot abruptly touched down and basically dug into the concrete. In spite of the released brake parachute, the plane overshot the end of the runway and stopped. The pilot got out of the cockpit. Some tried to take pictures, but the pilot shot into the air. People hid their cameras. Then the police arrived. All flights at the airport were canceled for 5 hours. In order to conceal the plane's state identity, it was covered up and dragged off the strip. But an airport is not a military base. A rumor about a Soviet military plane walked fast. By the evening of September 6th, Hakatati attracted crowds of journalists. They did not waste time. Soon, the photos made the front pages of the world press.
Press Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has held a press conference today on account of forced landing of the Soviet military plane in Japan. Belenko's mother and his wife told about the pilot's life in the Soviet Union. They denied insinuations that Belenko allegedly sought refuge in the USA and said they wanted him back.
Friends, colleagues, everybody was sure it was an unforeseen incident. The plane had simply lost direction. It was an emergency landing, and now he was kept by force in Japan. It was the only explanation. The Soviet authorities started an operation to get Belenko back. Japan was in a predicament. The incident could aggravate their tense relations with Moscow. After Japan capitulated in 1945, no peace treaty was signed between Russia and Japan. Japan claimed a number of islands, but the Soviet Union ignored this claim, protecting its borders. Japan realized that the situation was tricky, but were in no hurry to return the pilot or the plane. Japan was buying time. Representatives of the USSR and the USA in Japan started a mutually exclusive, intense activity. The Soviet Union wanted the plane back. America wanted it in Japan for as long as possible. Japan was looking for legal loopholes to detain the plane. An original reason was found: the violation of the national borders and illegal import of explosives. Thus, Belenko was dubbed something between a spy and a terrorist. The plane itself, MiG-25, being a piece of evidence in the criminal case. No one in Moscow believed this nonsense, but laws were laws. The plane stayed in Japan. The Soviet leadership knew, while delicate negotiations went on, America will put the squeeze on Japan. It seemed America's dream of catching the foxbat was coming true. Unwritten rules of the Cold War implied a non-stop arms race. The strongest arguments in the 1950s being strategic bombers, carriers of nuclear weapons. Yet their velocity up to 1,000 kilometers and their altitude up to 15 kilometers was not enough to burn through enemy's air defense. Thus, both in USA and USSR, a real revolution was made in aircraft engineering. Machines appeared with velocities up to 3,000 kilometers per hour, 3 times as fast as the speed of sound. The altitude, it was breathtaking, over 20,000 meters above the ground. Every country did their homework, and no cribbing. December 23, 1957, North American company began to develop a supersonic bomber, B-70 Valkyrie. The name of the project was chosen as a result of a competition announced among USA Air Force staff. The scale and the cost of the project were immense. The Valkyrie cost 14 million human hours and $1.5 billion. The Valkyrie was to become the main means of attacking the USSR. It could cross the ocean and drop a 10-megaton thermonuclear bomb on the Soviet Union. By 1969, the Soviet Union already possessed effective anti-aircraft missile complexes, but their range didn't exceed 40 kilometers. It wasn't enough. For you can't cover the whole territory with such complexes. Soviet air defense faced a task: to find reliable protection from high supersonic American planes.
So they began to ponder from where to begin. This challenge was for interceptors, our interceptors, versus their bombers.
Not once had the Soviet Union criticized the USA's aggressive policy. Unlike America, we embraced the defense doctrine. However, the motto, "The best defense is offense," was well known by Americans. The Soviet Union was a threat. It was feared. To fear less, you need to know more. Reconnaissance flights over our territory started back in 1956. For this purpose, a high supersonic reconnaissance plane, U-2, was made at the Lockheed Company. Its raids over our country continued for 4 years. However, on May 1st, 1960, U-2 was taught a lesson. At 8:55, when flying over Sverdlovsk, the plane piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down by a missile of the S-75 complex. The wreck of the plane was demonstrated to the public for everyone to know better. The pilot was sentenced to 10 years in prison. After the incident with Powers, Khrushchev laid trust in missiles. And it's not true he was the only believer in missiles. U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara also decided that supersonic heavy bombers were useless. A missile was practically invulnerable and a lot cheaper. Successful trials of intercontinental ballistic missiles, Atlas and Titan, signed a death sentence to Valkyrie, which remained but an experiment. Sergeant Frank Saylor, the name-giving winner, was awarded $500 and a 3-day trip to Hollywood. Ballistic rockets of the USA were not the only threat. There was another one, the B-52 bombers. It was not the planes themselves being dangerous, but their supersonic cruise Hound Dog missiles, which could destroy any strategically important targets in the Soviet Union, and U-2 did the reconnaissance for such targets. The sad experience over the Urals convinced Americans a new reconnaissance plane was needed. In 1959, on the CIA's commission, Kelly Johnson, the leading constructor of Lockheed, started developing a supersonic reconnaissance plane, SR-71 Blackbird. Its airworthiness and its unusual appearance were impressive. Its whole concept was to meet two major requirements: obscurity for the radar and triple sonic speed. Obscurity was not reached. The plane's exterior heated up at supersonic speed, and engineers had to take up the titanium material. It was very expensive. Americans built around 50 such machines. The number of pilots for such planes was as scarce as the number of astronauts. Information about the Blackbird was leaked into the Soviet Union in 1960. The analysis of the USA's offensive potential finally convinced the Soviet leadership in the necessity to retaliate. In February 1962, a governmental resolution was passed to create a high supersonic plane in two versions, an interceptor and a scout plane. Arten Mikoyan was in charge of the project. As a result, the MiG-25 appeared, an unprecedented machine. Unlike the Blackbird, MiG was cheaper and a lot easier to operate. During the years of serial production, our country built 1,112 such planes.
Did America need such a machine? Their strategy was to attack. Maybe they didn't need it. They were pretty sure they wouldn't need such a machine. I think our general staff knew very well that America didn't have a plane like this.
The Soviet Union accused Japan of fabricating lies, but MiG-25 was still being kept as a piece of evidence. It became known that Belenko was in jail. Soon a trial was held, where he was charged of breaking 4 articles of the laws of Japan. The fact convinced the Soviet Union even more that Belenko was just a victim. Belenko Viktor Ivanovich, born in 1947 in Nalchik, graduated from Armavir Air Force Academy, served as an instructor pilot at Stavropol Aviation School. On personal request, was transferred to the Far East. Russian, a communist, senior lieutenant, senior pilot, deputy commissar of a squadron, married with a son. Our diplomats in Moscow showed even greater activity. Belenko found himself in Japan against his will. That's why he fired warning shots and didn't want the MiG's pictures taken. Japanese authorities used force. He was handcuffed, his head covered with a sack. He was pushed into a car and then imprisoned. The kidnapping of Belenko was an arbitrary act, a gross violation of the Helsinki Accords, recently signed by President Ford. The Japanese government got scared and decided to organize a meeting of the Soviet representatives with Belenko. So maybe they'll let Belenko go, but we needed the plane back too. Soviet representatives came to the Hakodate airport and said that they were commissioned with MiG's delivery back to the USSR. The chief of the airport, Masayo Kajioka, replied that the plane was guarded by the police and he couldn't fulfill the request of Russian friends. But the pressure was so strong, the Japanese authorities wavered. Not once, Japan's foreign minister informed the USA State Department. Tokyo is inclined to return the plane as soon as possible, so that the Russians could keep their face. Americans didn't want to hear that. Washington suggested the following. The MiG will be detained in Japan for a month. That would be enough to carefully study the plane. Moscow received cipher messages from her residents in the USA and Japan. A big group of American military men arrived in Japan. Our ambassador reported to Moscow, "We can't prevent the study of the plane. The fox got in a trap." Back in July of 1967, the plane was taking part in the air parade in Domodedovo, near Moscow. That was the one and only time MiG appeared before the wide public. 3 rumbling MiGs passed in the air at a low altitude. Foreign guests were in shock. By possessing information about the MiG, America could have saved a lot of money developing their own machines. But photographs and fragments of intelligence information gave a very approximate picture about MiG-25. Nothing was known specifically about the plane, and they needed to know. A plane rocket with wings, needed only for the takeoff and landing. That was how Artem Mikoyan described the plane.
In 1962, we practically had all the drawings ready. We were closer than America to building that plane. That's why we went with the construction from heat-resistant stainless steel, which allowed to quickly master the production technology.
It was an unprecedented project. Almost all institutes of aviation and metallurgical production were involved in the development of the aircraft steel. A unique assembly, foundry, and welding equipment were needed. Traditional riveting was not used, but different types of welding, including automatic. Plexiglass for the canopy, rubber wheels, hydraulic liquid, everything was done for the first time. It could be compared to shifting from wooden planes to metal ones.
We were full of enthusiasm. There were up to 11 planes tested on the grounds in armaments. Present on the grounds were specialists in our design bureau and experts of industry, from 600 to 700 people. We didn't look at the time, worked as much as we had to.
They wanted to fly the highest and the fastest. To be ahead of America became literally possible. Achievements followed one after the other. The plane was dubbed Liquor Store, for it contained 240 liters of spirit and water mixture for cooling the aggregates of the plane. It is more than 600 bottles of vodka. The worried wives of the technical staff sent a letter to Comrade Mikoyan with a request to substitute this disgusting booze with something undrinkable.
Mikoyan said that spirit had to be prohibited in the AF, for it would become a serious problem, that it would rouse censure on the part of Defense Ministry leadership, and he ordered to look for an alternative. I will not be giving any names here, but one leading engineer played a trick with tubes ruptured. They filled a tube with water and put it into the fridge, and they showed the ruptured tube to Mikoyan. Later, he learned about the trick and said, "We made a right decision anyway." That was how we insisted on the spirit and water mixture.
As for Mikoyan, he loved jokes. There's a telltale circulating among aviators how Mikoyan remarked to the worried wives, "If the motherland wants it, the plane will be fueled with Armenian cognac." Tests of the plane were finished in 1969. MiG-25 was put into serial production. But the flying tests were more difficult and tragic. At a low altitude speed of 1,100 kilometers per hour, the plane became difficult to fly. On July 30th, 1969, during tests before another presentation of the MiG-25 to the leadership of the country, the plane of Vladimir Maestrenko suddenly turned over and hit the ground before the very eyes of the brass. These mysterious accidents meant the project had to be wrapped up. But the test pilot, Oleg Gudkov, found the cause of the accidents. The weather was gloomy that day, but it didn't affect the process of the tests. Oleg Gudkov agreed to later meet with his friend, Yuri Shevikov, at the checkpoint. After the flights, they would have a beer or two and talk about this and that. At 11:50, Gudkov's plane took off. The main part of the program fulfilled, he failed to send the machine into critical phase. He had enough time and fuel left, so he tried to make another go. 15 minutes was left before meeting with his friend on the ground.
From the very start, during the critical phase, N536 was thrown into spinning. That's all we heard from him. We got into the car. The plane crashed somewhere in Ramenskoye. So we went looking for the plane. It happened here. All along the distance, between Fabrichnaya station and up to Grashnoy Zimnya works, MiG-25's parts were scattered about. It had gone into smithereens, like a meteor. Oleg was in a difficult situation. He was approaching the town of Ramenskoye. But he hoped the spinning would stop. Such moments seem to be long, like eternity.
Oleg Gudkov tried to level out the plane. Self-recording devices registered all of his steps, showing engineers the reason of all previous catastrophes, helping them to correct the mistakes. Gudkov was sure he was not dying because not a trace of adrenaline was found in his blood. A dear price was paid to get that MiG-25. They remember all those long and humiliating negotiations with the Japanese partners.
Three times on end, we were going to stop negotiations and fly away, meaning to discontinue the negotiations because they didn't want to give the plane away, because their conditions were such we couldn't accept.
At last, a meeting with the Soviet pilot was allowed. It took place in a special room. The first to come there was the first secretary of the Soviet embassy in Japan. Two Japanese guards watched him closely. Then Belenko was brought in by another two guards. He was dropping his gaze and didn't even greet the diplomat. Both men sat across from each other at far ends of a 20-meter-long table. There was no chance to look at the pilot closely, and maybe it wasn't Belenko at all. Nevertheless, the diplomat spoke up. "I represent the Soviet embassy here. Your comrades asked to tell you that they are worried about you. The Soviet government doesn't blame you for anything. We know that it was a forced landing because you had lost direction. I'm here to help you to return home, to your family, your close ones." Belenko, if it was Belenko, interrupted the diplomat. He rose to his feet and muttered, "I came to Japan on my own wish. I'm seeking political asylum in the USA. So spare me all these slogans of yours." Moscow qualified this interview as a farce. Izvestia daily wrote, "Obviously the pilot wasn't inadequate, maybe sedated by some drugs." The Soviet Union still insisted that the plane be returned. As a result, Prime Minister Takeo Miki issued a communique on September 27th. The plane will be returned, not earlier than October 5th. That was the day when they would be over studying it. Americans were very operative. 200-odd engineers rummaged in the plane's guts. They analyzed it, starting its engines, turning on the locator, measuring its black light characteristics, taking samples of glass and metal. For 10 years, the American intelligence had been hunting for secrets of this flying miracle. Hakodate Airport, Japan, 1976. And at last, they laid their hands on it. After detailed study, they had to return the plane.
We have agreed about the conditions to receive the machine. We had the daylight hours for our convenience. We were supposed to take the plane on board of a Soviet ship.
The Japanese had dismantled the plane and packed its aggregates into thick iron-lined wooden crates. They thought our Russian lad were such weakniks. But no, our guys tore into the crates in a matter of 2 hours. and saw what secrets the Americans had been looking for. The pertaining act was drawn up, and it was later our strong argument during Contra settlements with Japan. On October 1st, 1976 in Washington, the Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko met with President Ford in the White House. It was a harsh exchange of opinions. Belenko is a refugee, said Ford, and he had every reason to seek political asylum. We will gladly provide him with convenient life here. Only then did Gromyko realize that Belenko was a traitor. Belenko is a thief, said Gromyko. He's a traitor and a criminal. He has no right for political asylum. He has to be repatriated to the USSR. But Ford adamantly replied, "It's a settled matter. It lies in our sole jurisdiction and is not subject to be debated." On hearing this, Gromyko refused to stay at the banquet, saying he had urgent business awaiting in Moscow. It was a very bitter experience. Many of the Soviet brass lost their posts. Belenko's testimony to the CIA and files of the criminal case in the USSR provided us with a detailed picture of this story. After pilot school, Belenko became a flight instructor in Salsk. He wasn't happy with his work. He wrote reports applying for a flying job, but with no avail. This fact embittered him greatly. During his fourth attempt, he staked everything.
He had a loud confrontation with head of the flight school. He suddenly was a fountain of blackmailing, saying, "General, if you don't put me up with the MiG-25 combat unit, I'll tell them how you guys use coolant for booze, pretending to be such straight people. I'll tell them you make me graduate pilots who are in fact unready. I'll tell them how you fabricate flight logs."
All of this was enough to jeopardize the general's career, so he sent Belenko for psychiatric examination. The man was examined in a mental ward. The psychiatrist was an honest person and concluded that Belenko was mentally sane.
So nobody did any guesswork. Nobody tried to find reason with Belenko. Very soon, Belenko volunteered to be transferred to the Far East as MiG-25's pilot. It means he hit the mark. Everything went according to his plan.
No one understood why Belenko chose to live in that hole. Chiguvska Garrison, Far East, 1976. His wife took life in Chiguvska as banishment. She wanted a divorce, to go away with her son. Belenko ignored his wife's nagging. He had his own plans, waiting for his chance. He would enter into his notepad technical details of MiG-25's characteristics, reasoning they would come in handy in America. During tactical classes, he would secretly draw up the shortest course from Chiguvska to a closest aerodrome in Japan. This map would later be discovered in his house.
His English was rather poor, but he had prepared a note in English. "I'm asking to get in touch with American representatives. Please do not approach the plane. It's a top secret object."
At a high altitude, he turned on the afterburner, economizing fuel. And instead of flying back to Chiguvska, he took the course due southeast. From an 8,000-meter altitude, he dove his plane to a 1-kilometer level, and then to a treetop level, not to be spotted by radars. Then he pressed the red button. It was a disaster signal, which he soon turned off. He wanted to produce the impression his plane had crashed. That was why the search party was looking for the plane.
Low-altitude radars were turned off. That was why he wasn't detected on low altitude. But he was spotted when he was flying over the sea.
Belenko handed his note to a Japanese intelligence officer. The officer asked him, "Have you lost direction?" "No, I came here intentionally. I request asylum in the USA. Get me in touch with American representatives." Belenko was brought to a hotel. He had covered his head with his jacket, to a great disappointment of the reporters. And he could only see what was going on under his feet.
Japanese and American intelligence feared our special services will kill Belenko, so they prepared an intricate plan for his transportation. Several identical jeeps coming from different directions reached the crossroads, swapped places. Now it was not clear in which of the cars Belenko was.
After Belenko's interview with the Soviet diplomat, makeup specialist changed his appearance, and he was then brought to the airport.
He was greeted there by a beaming CIA officer who said, "You will be all right. You are a hero. America is proud of you." Belenko then proceeded into the plane, where a whole compartment was prepared for him. They gave him a bottle of Russian vodka. He took a swig and said, self-complacently, "I'm ready to answer all your questions."
Most powerful political levels were used to get Belenko back to the USSR. A good deal of venom flowed back and forth. Our organs wanted to exchange Belenko for an American agent, and they tried to influence American senators.
Senators received most lavish presents. A couple of grateful senators said that Belenko should be returned to the USSR immediately. And it was not only presents, we were even ready to go to strategic compromises.
But to no avail, Belenko wrote an official letter to the American government requesting asylum. Day after day, Belenko would give the CIA people technical and combat characteristics of the Foxbat. He also disclosed other secret information, giving names, showing locations of military bases.
Americans were interested in materials the plane was made of. So they did cuts, conducted chemical tests, and so on. They were fascinated by our nice materials.
Belenko had made a once-in-a-lifetime present to the CIA. The analysis of the MiG-25 had brought a lot of surprises. The biggest one being that the plane wasn't made of titanium. And that was not all. According to Air International magazine, MiG-25 can't give you an adequate insight into the Soviet philosophy. The plane is totally different.
When they studied the radar, they saw it was based on vacuum tubes. Back then, microelectronics was widely used already for designing ground and airborne radars in combat systems. But Americans concluded that Russians were such cunning foxes because electronic radars could not resist high temperatures. They simply burnt down. But Russians, instead of using television systems for radars, made an exclusion and used vacuum tubes. They simply didn't know we were on a lower level.
After the MiG-25 had been hijacked by Belenko, the moral and material damage to the country was immense. With a Russian interceptor in their hands, the Americans now knew about our state of affairs in aviation, metallurgy, and radio electronics. And the secrets divulged by Belenko provided them with a good picture about the Soviet air defense. Thanks to that information, they could make new defense systems, thus causing us to modernize our cutting-edge air defense systems. And there is another curious fact. Look at this plane, the American plane, F-15. Compare it to our bomber, and you'll find a stark similarity. Belenko was interrogated every day for 6 months on end and was drained of all information he could provide. What should be done to him further? So he was provided with a new identity and new documents. A cash fund was formed for him, which was not so lavish though. No one needed Belenko anymore. He stopped being fashionable. He was just a sore in the eye now. But the name of pilot Gudkov was not erased from our memory. There is a street bearing his name in his hometown of Zhukovsky, and we don't think there will ever appear such an address as Belenko Street in America.